clear now that police officers are not authorized to racially profile. They're only authorized if they're enforcing another statute, another law. If they stop, detain, or arrest someone, and they have a reasonable suspicion that this person is undocumented, they can then ask the question, if you're legal, produce your documentation that you're required to carry with you at all times.
Do you know how low the quantum is to make a lawful stop? We're not talking about an arrest. We're talking about the level of a Terry stop. Under the Constitution, if they have a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot, that translates practically into virtually any activity, as we see in the criminal courts every day.
But Danny, here's the question. You know, if you're not doing anything wrong, then what's the problem with being stopped? It's the same thing as if someone pulls me out of line at the airport. If I'm not doing anything wrong and I have nothing to hide, then why not get stopped?
That's different. The airport is different than the street. The airport, if you were talking about a federal border, then all bets are off. At federal borders, the federal government does have the power to search you under a different quantum of evidence. But on the street, no, it's very different.
The principle is that if you're not doing anything wrong, then what's the problem with somebody asking for your papers?
But if you look at the Supreme Court's and the Circuit Court's jurisprudence under the Fourth Amendment, when it comes to getting a reasonable suspicion for something like getting off of a bus, all right, you can find cases that say we had a reasonable suspicion because this person got off the bus first. We had a reasonable suspicion because the person got off the bus last. We had a reasonable suspicion because the person got off in the middle of the group getting off of the bus, okay? And courts have upheld almost no threshold for a reasonable suspicion that a person's engaged in illegal activity.
You know, Lynn, if we were to apply the same standard to all aspects of police work, the police would have to stay home because they couldn't do their jobs. Here's what I found fascinating. The President of the United States, the Attorney General, the Homeland Security Director, an Assistant Secretary of State, and the State Department Chief Spokesman all were very critical of this law, and they hadn't read it. And you get to the point of saying, are we going to be governed by passions, politics, or the law? Now, if the police abuse the law, there is recourse through the courts to fix what was wrong.
But after you've sat in a cell for maybe 8 to 9 months, then you can get your day in court. The idea that eventually you get your day in court is a nice thought, but if someone's rights have been violated,
if you're an
then
American
they've been sitting.
citizen, you're going to sit in jail for 8 or 9 months.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be able to prove.
There's a lawsuit against Joe Arpaio in Arizona right now, brought by a U.S. citizen who was detained overnight because the sheriff's deputies wouldn't believe that he had been born in the United States.
8 or 9 months.
Would you like to go to jail in town, Jan, for overnight?
Changes nothing. There's always a potential for misbehavior on the part of police. That exists before the statute. That exists after the statute. The statute itself changes nothing in that regard.
But in practice, again, we have a law that says if you've got someone on a stop, and remember, a stop is a very small level of evidence you need to get to a stop. Then you can start inquiring as to something that, number one, is likely to be discriminatory, but number two, probably gets into the area of federal immigration, which is a supremacy clause preemption issue. And I realize you guys disagree with that. And I've said from the outset, I agree with the frustration with the federal government. But this is going to come down to a court's either going to say, A, it's an immigration issue, or B, it's a police power issue, and it could go either way.
On that note, I do want to go to the telephone lines because we actually have some friends from Facebook that want to get through and tell us what they think about this topic, including Mike. Mike, it's good to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much.
So what do you think about this Arizona law that's causing so much controversy?
Well, I can't speak with the legalese that some of the people can speak with, but I do have to say, from a normal individual, you look at it and say, I don't want to deny anybody the right to be in the country and have a better life.
Right.
But at the same time, you would want them to, back some of the burden that everyone else has to take on to make sure that they are providing that better life for further generations down the line. When they come into this country and decide to come in illegally, they're deciding to break the law. Now, whether they get caught or not, they're breaking the law. And we talk about giving the police power, for these Terry stops. They can exercise that power anytime they want for anything. I happen to be a very big gun rights activist, and I can walk down the street in Pennsylvania, and I shouldn't be harassed for having an open firearm.
Okay. So you can understand where people coming into the border, particularly those who are documented, don't want to be harassed. You would understand that, right?
Well, right. If someone's coming into this country legally I can understand where they don't want to be harassed, unless, we talk about probable cause. But again, like they said, probable cause can be anything. But there has to be a tipping point where you say, okay, what's the difference between probable cause and what's the difference between what's legal and what's not?
Okay, Mike, I've got a question for you. There are a lot of people who are saying, okay, it's time to close the borders for right now, that it's time to put a moratorium on anyone coming in, legal otherwise, just because we have this problem and it's not under control. What would you say to that?
I would have to agree with that. And with the numbers that they're talking about of people that are in this country illegally, we've got to get a handle on the situation before we can say, okay, now let's put this in place and let's open the floodgates again, but let's do this the right way.
All right. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the call. Really do. All right, I want to get some thoughts here on the panel about a concept of a moratorium, because, a lot of people, they think they embrace it. They think it's a great idea. Others, they'll say, wait a minute, you're overreacting. What do you think, Jan?
We have a very generous legal immigration system in this country. We admit every year, and we give green cards for permanent residents to nearly 1 million every year, which is more than all the rest of the nations of the world combined. So that is not a broken system. We hear a lot about a broken system. This is not a broken system. It's just not being enforced. At the root of the question is whether we are willing, whether our respect for immigrants is so great that we're willing to let every single person in the world who wants to come here, or whether we want Congress to set some sort of limitation on who can come here and whether we're prepared to enforce that limitation or not. That's the root of the question.
Well, that's going to be the question that I'm going to ask you, and we'll find out what the rest of our panel has to say to that when we come back. We'll take a short break. If you'd like to tell us what you think, email me right now. My address is lynn@lynndoyle.net. It's Your Call continues right after this. We're continuing our discussion here on illegal immigration, and one answer to the problem, according to some people, is to put a moratorium on all immigration, including legal immigration. Just put up a hold on, nobody comes in, nobody goes out kind of sign on our borders. Bill Stock is an immigration attorney and expert. I'm wondering what you think about that idea.
Well, Lynn, there's only 5 ways to come to the United States. There's very small numbers of visas for people who make an investment in the United States or who are fleeing persecution. Most of the 1 million people who Jan mentioned come here because they're already related to someone who's here. But that has to be a really close relationship. You have to be a spouse or a parent or a child of a U.S. citizen, maybe the brother or sister of a U.S. citizen. Some of the waiting lists, though, are 10 and 20 years. To tell your spouse that you have to wait 7 or 10 years to come into the United States and be with your family, that's unconscionable. That's part of the reason why about 3 million of those people have come here, because they can't wait to be with their family. And the employment system, it's even worse. If you have a job waiting for you where a grower in Arizona can't find someone to pick their fruit, they might have to wait 10, 15 years for someone to come permanently.
I think a lot of people misunderstand why so many people are in the country undocumented, and you just put some light on it, and that is that they're desperate. These aren't necessarily the criminal element, but more the folks that are trying to be reunited with their family, or some, had children here and can't leave them behind. So I think maybe people don't realize that there's a very sensitive nature to the family connections when it comes to undocumented workers.
Absolutely. I have none of my clients who would prefer to be in the United States illegally. They'd all rather have a legal way to come here, which is why I think what Congress is talking about, a comprehensive solution, which both reinforces the borders and provides some mechanism for folks who came here, and provides ways, for example, for people to come up who have a seasonal job and go back after they've earned some money.
What do we do with the folks that are here and they are undocumented, but as Bill points out, they'd like to be able to be here legally, but either too much time has gone by or it just hasn't worked out to their benefit? Do we give them amnesty?
No, we don't. An interesting argument can be made for open borders, and Bill's laid out some of the arguments for letting every single person in. If we do that, hundreds of millions of people are going to come here in very short order. But I think the better argument is for Congress, the elected representatives of the people, to set a limit and enforce the limit. The one thing that makes